The night was dark and heavy with rain. The kind of night when even the bravest drivers kept their eyes wide open on the road. Thunder rolled in the distance, lightning cut across the black sky, and the smell of wet soil filled the air. A lonely, country road stretched far ahead with no lights, no houses, and no people. Only the steady sound of rain hitting the ground. A pickup truck came rushing down that road, its rusty body shaking, its headlights piercing through the storm. The driver had no patience. He was drunk and angry. His foot pressed too hard on the gas. The wheels splashed muddy water as he sped through the night. Out of the shadows, a figure stumbled onto the road. It was not a human. Her skin was pale. With a strange glow, her eyes large and filled with fear, she walked unsteady, as if she had been running for days. Her breaths came sharp and painful. The driver did not slow down. He barely even saw her until it was too late. The truck smashed into her with a sickening thud. Her fragile body was thrown onto the wet road, rolling in the mud. The headlights lit her for a brief second, and then the truck kept going. The driver cursed under his breath and never looked back, leaving her broken and alone. She lay in the mud, the rain washing over her strange wounds. Her blood shimmered faintly, not red but silver blue, mixing with the water on the road. Her hand reached out weakly as if begging the empty night for help. But no one was there. Her breaths grew weaker. Her glowing eyes dimmed. But then, footsteps. Slow at first, then faster. Cutting through the sound of rain, a man appeared, his coat soaked, his boots heavy with mud. He had been walking home from the nearby town after fixing a fence for a neighbor. His name was Daniel. He stopped when he saw the shape on the road. At first he thought it was a hurt animal, but when lightning flashed, he froze. It was a woman, or at least something that looked like one. Daniel rushed closer, his heart pounding. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold but soft, and under his fingers, it pulsed with a faint glow. She opened her eyes just for a moment, glowing orbs staring straight into his, filled with pain and fear. "Help," she whispered, the word broken, her voice strange and musical. Not fully human, but he understood the plea. Daniel looked down the road, but there was no sign of the pickup truck, only fading tire marks in the mud. He cursed under his breath. Someone had hit her and left her here to die. He looked back at the woman, her chest rising slowly, her breath shallow. He didn't know what she was, where she came from, or what danger followed her. But leaving her here felt impossible. He slipped his arms under her body. Lifting her carefully, she was lighter than he expected, almost too light, like she had not eaten in days. She gasped in pain, but did not resist. Her head fell against his chest, her silver blue blood staining his shirt. He carried her off the road, his boots sinking in the mud. The rain poured harder as he reached his old truck parked nearby. He laid her gently in the passenger seat, covering her with his coat. Her eyes flickered open again. She stared at him as if trying to understand why he was helping. A tear rolled down her cheek, mixing with the rain. Daniel sat in the driver's seat, his mind racing. What if someone was looking for her? What if the police saw her? What if she wasn't even safe to touch? Yet none of that mattered in that moment. She needed help, and he was the only one there. He started the engine. The truck roared to life, headlights cutting through the storm once more. As he drove, he glanced at her. She whispered something in a language he didn't know, her words soft and filled with sorrow. Then she fell into unconsciousness again. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter. He didn't know who she was, but he knew one thing. This night was not going to end like a normal night. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning flashing over the endless road. Inside the truck, a human man and a dying alien woman shared a silence heavy with mystery. Daniel didn't know it yet, but by stopping to help her, he had stepped into a story much bigger than himself, and somewhere far away, in the shadows of the forest, strange lights moved between the trees. Other eyes were searching, hunting, and the night had only just begun. Daniel's truck rattled over the wet road, the rain beating like drums against the windshield. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. He kept glancing at the passenger seat, where the alien woman lay half-conscious under his coat. Her glowing wounds shimmered faintly in the dim light. Every shallow breath she took sent a shiver through him. He didn't know what she was, not exactly, but he knew she wasn't human. Her skin carried a strange glow, her veins lit like tiny rivers of silver under the surface, and the sound of her breathing was different, broken, yet soft, almost like a song. His mind raced with questions. Should he drive straight to the hospital? Should he call the police? Should he just stop the truck and walk away before this became something bigger than him? But every time he looked at her face, fragile and pale, the thought of leaving her behind burned inside him like shame. The small town lights flickered faintly. In the distance, Daniel slowed the truck, his heart thundering. If he took her to the hospital, people would see. The police would ask questions. Strangers would notice her glowing wounds, and soon the whole world would know something alien had arrived. What would they do to her? He had lived long enough to know. Humans were curious, but also cruel when faced with the unknown. He parked his truck under a broken street lamp on the edge of town. Rain pattered against the metal roof. He sat still for a long moment, his head resting on the steering wheel. Then he looked at her again. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a brief second she whispered, "Hide, please." Her voice was faint but filled with fear. She knew somehow that showing herself meant danger. Daniel let out a long breath. He made his choice. He would not take her to the hospital. He would not call the police. Instead, he turned, the truck toward his cabin deep in the woods, far from town, far from curious eyes. The road was rough, the wheels skidding on the wet mud. Branches slapped against the windshield as the forest closed in around them. His cabin was old, built by his father before him, hidden in trees, a place no one visited. When he reached the small clearing, he stopped the truck, killed the headlights, and listened. Only rain and distant thunder answered. He carried her inside, pushing the wooden door open with his shoulder. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. He laid her gently on the old couch. Her glowing blood had stained his coat, his shirt, even his hands. It didn't feel like blood. It was warmer, thicker, and when he wiped it, it shimmered faintly before fading. Daniel lit a lamp. Its yellow glow filled the cabin. Her face looked softer now, but still pale and pained. He grabbed a clean towel, a bowl of warm water, and his old first aid kit. He wasn't a doctor, but he had patched up enough wounds in his life to know what to do, except nothing about her was normal. When he pressed the towel to her shoulder, the wound hissed faintly, silver liquid soaking into the cloth. She stirred, her lips moving, speaking in a language he could not understand. The words rolled like music, strange and beautiful. He leaned closer. "I don't understand you," he whispered, "but I'm trying to help." She blinked as if recognizing the kindness in his voice, and her hand, weak and trembling, clutched his wrist. For a moment they locked eyes, human and alien, and Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. It was not just fear or pity, it was connection. She was more than a stranger. She was someone who needed him, someone left behind by the world. The night deepened. Rain softened into a steady whisper. Daniel sat beside her, his mind heavy with doubts. Had he made a mistake bringing her here? What if someone saw the blood trail? What if whoever had left her on that road came looking? His cabin was hidden but not invisible, and something inside told him that this woman wasn't just lost, she was being hunted. He looked at the rifle hanging on the wall, an old family weapon he had not touched in years, and for the first time in a long while he felt the weight of needing it again. Hours passed. The storm outside finally began to fade. In the silence, Daniel nearly dozed off in his chair until he heard it. A faint noise outside. Not thunder, not rain, but something else. He rose quietly, moving to the window. The forest was dark. Yet in the distance, he thought he saw lights moving between the trees. Not lanterns, not flashlights, but something brighter, sharper, like glowing orbs. He stepped back, his heart hammering. Someone was out there, searching. Behind him, the alien woman stirred, her voice weak but urgent. She whispered one word in broken English, her accent strange but clear enough. "Hunters." Daniel turned to her, his stomach twisting. This wasn't just an accident, this wasn't just a choice of kindness. By saving her, he had stepped into a dangerous game. Hunters were coming, and he was the only shield between her and whatever. Fate awaited. He clenched his fists, looked at the door, and made another choice, a stronger one this time. He was not going to let them take her. Not tonight. Not ever. The cabin walls groaned as the wind blew. The shadows outside grew thicker. The night had taken on a new silence, heavy with danger, and Daniel knew his life had changed forever. The storm outside had grown quiet by morning. The sound of dripping, rainwater falling from the trees was the only reminder of the long, violent night. Daniel sat slumped in his chair, his rifle leaning against the wall within arm's reach. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but he had not slept. He kept listening, waiting, afraid of the lights he had seen in the forest hours earlier. On the couch, the alien woman stirred, her body shifting beneath the old blanket Daniel had placed over her. Her wounds still glowed faintly like embers refusing to die out. Daniel sat up straight, his heart jumping when her eyes slowly opened. They were not human eyes. Not exactly. Her pupils were wider, reflecting light even in the dim cabin, and a faint silver ring circled them. She blinked several times, confused, frightened, then focused on him. Her lips parted and she spoke words Daniel didn't understand. The language flowed like a song, smooth but broken. He raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "You're safe here," he whispered, his voice calm. "No one is going to hurt you." Her breathing quickened. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. Daniel rushed forward and gently held her shoulder. "Easy," he said. "You're hurt." She looked at his hand, then at his face, her expression filled with both fear and disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why a human had helped her. He fetched a bowl of water and a clean cloth, carefully dabbing at her wounds every time the cloth touched her skin. The silver-blue liquid shimmered brighter before dimming again. She didn't resist, though her eyes never left his. Daniel could feel her trying to read him, trying to judge if he was truly trustworthy. After a long silence, she finally spoke one word in broken English, her voice rough but clear. "Why?" Daniel paused, his hand still holding the cloth. "Why, what?" he asked softly. "Why, help?" she whispered, struggling to form the words. Daniel swallowed. He wasn't sure how to answer, but the truth came out anyway. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong," he said simply. "I couldn't just walk away." Her eyes softened. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say more, but she collapsed back onto the couch. Exhausted, Daniel covered her with the blanket again and sat beside her, the weight of the moment pressing. On him, he realized she wasn't just recovering, she was hiding, running from something that terrified her more than death itself. Hours passed. Sunlight slowly broke through the trees outside, filling the cabin with a weak glow. Daniel heated some soup on the stove, the smell of broth filling the air. He helped her sit up carefully and handed her the spoon. She stared at it curiously, as though she had never seen one before. But then she tried, her hand trembling, spilling half the liquid before reaching her lips. Daniel steadied her hand. "Here, let me," he said, gently guiding the spoon. She accepted the food with slow, careful sips. Each swallow seemed to give her a little more strength. When she finally managed a small smile, faint but real, Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest. Later, she tried again to speak, this time mixing her strange language with broken English. "Name?" she asked, pointing weakly at him. "Daniel," he replied, his voice calm. "My name is Daniel." She repeated it slowly as if testing the sound. "Dan, I-L." Then she touched her chest and whispered, "Liara." Daniel nodded, repeating her name, Liara. Her eyes lit for the first time since he had found her, a flicker of hope crossing her face. But the peace didn't last long. While Daniel prepared more bandages, Liara suddenly stiffened, her head snapping toward the window, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered in her own tongue, then struggled to speak the word in English. "Hunters." Daniel froze, every muscle tightening. He looked outside but saw nothing. only trees and rain. But the way she trembled told him it wasn't his imagination. She had heard something he couldn't, something coming closer. He grabbed the rifle and loaded it. The sound of metal clicking echoed in the small cabin. "If they come here, they'll have to go through me first," he muttered. Liara shook her head weakly, clutching his arm. "Danger, too many." Her voice was filled with desperation, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakness. Daniel stared at her, her fear cutting deep into him. She wasn't lying. She wasn't exaggerating. She knew exactly what was out there. He looked at the door, then back at her, his heart pounding with the weight of another decision. He had already chosen to save her life, chosen to hide her. Now he had to choose whether to fight for her. Liara's eyes searched his, silently begging him not to abandon her. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had never been a soldier, never a hero, just a man living quietly in the woods. But something inside him shifted. He could not turn away now. He sat back down beside her, gripping the rifle firmly. "Then we'll be ready," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever they are, they're not taking you." Liara looked at him in silence, then slowly. She nodded, a tear rolling down her glowing cheek. For the first time since the accident, she believed she wasn't alone anymore. Outside, the forest was quiet, too quiet, the silence before the storm. Daniel knew the real danger hadn't even started yet, and as he sat beside her, watching her drift back into uneasy sleep, he realized this was only the beginning of a battle he never asked for. But one he was now determined to fight. The day passed slowly, each hour stretched thin by tension. Daniel worked around the cabin in silence, his eyes often drifting to the alien woman lying on the couch. Liara's breathing was steadier now, her wounds faintly glowing but no longer spilling the silver-blue liquid. Every time she opened her eyes, he saw gratitude mixed with fear, as though she knew the peace wouldn't last. By evening, the forest outside had grown darker. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, thick with silence. Daniel walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a little. The trees stood, still, their wet branches glistening, but his gut told him the danger Liara spoke of wasn't far. When he turned back, Liara was sitting upright, her fragile body trembling with effort, her glowing eyes locked on him. "They come," she whispered, her English rough but sharp. Daniel froze. "How do you know?" he asked. She touched her ear, tilting her head. "Here, machines." Her voice was certain. Daniel's chest tightened. He quickly moved to the corner and grabbed his rifle. The old weapon felt heavy in his hands. He hadn't carried it in years, but tonight it felt like the only thing standing between life and death. He blew out the lamp, letting the cabin fall into shadow. Moments later, a low hum cut through the night, at first faint, then louder, like engines not built for Earth. Daniel's pulse raced as a strange glow filtered between the trees. Not lanterns, not headlights, but pale beams of blue sweeping slowly across the woods, searching. Liara clutched the blanket tighter, her eyes wide with terror. She whispered something in her own language, then struggled to form words he could understand. "They take me. No mercy." Her voice cracked. Daniel knelt beside her, gripping her hand. "They'll have to get through me first," he said firmly. The sound outside grew closer. Daniel peeked through a gap in the curtain. 3 figures moved between the trees, tall, wearing dark suits that shimmered faintly under the glow of their weapons. The weapons themselves looked alien. Long, sleek, glowing faintly at the edges. One of the figures scanned the ground with a device, its light sweeping across the wet soil. Daniel's breath caught. These weren't local men, they weren't police. They were something else, something far more dangerous. The hunters Liara had warned about. A voice carried through the forest, strange and metallic, not quite human, though shaped like words. The sound made Liara flinch. She whispered quickly, "They say might find me, alive or dead." Her voice trembled. Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. His thoughts raced. He couldn't fight them head-on. Not with weapons like that. But he knew the forest. Every path, every shadow, and every trick to use. He moved quickly, placing his finger over his lips to signal silence. Then he slipped toward the back door, motioning for Liara to stay hidden. She obeyed, curling down into the couch, eyes filled with fear but also trust. Outside, the hunters spread out, their boots barely making a sound on the wet earth. Daniel crouched behind a fallen tree near his cabin, watching them through the shadows. He could see their strange helmets, smooth and reflective, hiding their faces. One of them lifted a scanner and the device emitted a sharp beep, its glow pointing directly toward the cabin. Daniel's stomach twisted. They were closing in. He needed to act fast. He picked up a rock and hurled it deep into the woods. The sound cracked through the night. The hunters froze, turning sharply. Two of them moved toward the noise. Weapons raised, the third stayed near the cabin, scanning the area. Daniel crept closer, his rifle steady, his breath shallow. The hunter near the cabin paused, lifting its weapon. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the silence echoing through the forest. The hunter staggered back, sparks flying from its suit. It wasn't a clean kill, but it was enough to drop the figure to the ground. Liara gasped inside the cabin, hearing the shot. Daniel rushed back inside, slamming the door shut. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. "They know you're here." Liara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Daniel caught her, lifting her into his arms. She was light, too light. "Hide," she whispered. "Deep. Forest." Her words barely formed, but desperate. Daniel nodded. He kicked dirt over the fire in the stove, plunging the cabin into complete darkness, then pushed open the back door, slipping into the night with her held close. Behind them, the two hunters returned, discovering their fallen comrade. One of them knelt, pressing a hand to the suit. The body twitched, then went still. The other raised its weapon toward the trees. Blue light pulsed through the forest, cutting through shadows like a blade. Daniel moved fast but careful, his boots silent on the wet leaves, every step calculated. He knew the hunters were faster, stronger, but he had something they didn't: knowledge of the land. Liara pressed her face against his chest, whispering faint words. "Please. Safe. Daniel." Hearing her voice gave him strength. He wasn't just running for himself anymore. He was running for her. The night swallowed them both, but the hunters were not far behind. Their voices carried through the woods, cold, mechanical, relentless. Daniel realized with a sinking heart. This was no longer about one choice, no longer about kindness. He was part of something far bigger, something dangerous. The hunters had arrived, and they would not stop until they had her. And as the blue glow cut across the forest floor behind him, Daniel swore under his breath. "Not while I'm still breathing." The forest was alive with danger. Every sound carried weight. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Daniel moved through the dark trees with Liara in his arms, his breath quick and sharp, her light frame pressing against his chest. Behind them, the hunters' cold voices echoed, and beams of blue light cut across the night, searching, hunting. Daniel finally stopped near a rocky ridge. He set Liara down carefully, her body trembling with weakness, her glowing wounds faint but still alive. "We can't keep running like this," he whispered, his voice rough from exhaustion. "You need to rest." She looked at him with tired, fearful eyes and shook her head weakly. "No. Stop." "They find," her English broken but desperate. Daniel crouched beside her, his hand tightening on the rifle. "Then we'll hide," he said firmly. Scanning the ridge, he spotted a narrow crevice in the rocks, hidden by vines and branches. It was barely big enough for them, but it would have to do. He lifted her again and guided her into the dark space, crouching low as he covered the entrance with branches. Inside, the space was tight, their shoulders nearly touching. Daniel could feel her trembling, her glowing eyes staring at him in the dark. "You're safe here," he whispered. "I promise." She studied his face, searching for truth, then slowly she whispered, "Why risk?" Daniel sighed, leaning his head against the cold rock. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said quietly. "Because you don't deserve to be hunted like this." She tilted her head. The word right seemed strange to her, as if she was trying to understand not just the word but the meaning behind it. For a moment the hunters' voices grew louder outside. Daniel held his breath, pressing a finger to his lips. Liara's hand trembled as it reached for his arm, clutching tightly, her grip stronger than before, her glowing eyes wide with fear. They stayed like that, frozen, until the light swept past and moved deeper into the woods. Daniel exhaled slowly, his body shaking with relief. Liara's hand didn't let go. Instead, she whispered softly, "Daniel, trust." The word was heavy, her voice filled with sincerity. He looked at her, surprised. "You trust me?" he asked. She nodded. "Human. Help. Not harm." The words struck him harder than he expected. In her world, maybe humans weren't known for kindness. Maybe she had seen cruelty before. But here, in this hidden cave, in this dark forest, she had chosen to believe in him. Time passed slowly. The forest sounds eventually softened. The hunter's presence faded into the distance. Daniel leaned back against the rock, exhaustion creeping over him. Liara shifted closer, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "Warm," she whispered, as if surprised by the comfort. Daniel chuckled softly. "Guess I'm good for something." They sat in silence, the bond between them growing without words. Daniel felt protective, not out of duty, but something deeper, something human. She was no longer just a stranger. She was someone who had placed her fragile trust in him, and he couldn't let her down. Later that night, as the forest grew quiet, again, Liara spoke in her own language, soft and melodic. Daniel didn't understand the words, but her tone was filled with sadness. He listened, then asked gently, "What are you saying?" She paused, then tried in broken English. "My people, gone, no home, no safe." Her eyes glistened with tears. Daniel's chest tightened. He reached out slowly, resting his hand over hers. "You're not alone now," he said softly. "As long as you're with me, you're safe." She looked at him, her glowing eyes shining in the darkness, and for the first time, a faint but true smile touched her lips. The hours dragged. Exhaustion finally pulled at them. Daniel leaned back, his rifle still in his lap. Liara curled closer, her breathing steady now. For the first time since he found her, she slept without fear. Daniel stayed awake, guarding the entrance, listening for danger, his eyes heavy but his resolve strong. As dawn painted the forest with pale light, Daniel knew the hunters would return. This night had only been a pause, not an escape, but something had changed between them. They were no longer just a man and an alien thrown together by accident. They had built something fragile yet powerful. Trust. And in that bond, Daniel found a new strength. He wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. He was protecting someone who believed in him, someone who saw him as more than just another, human. He swore to himself quietly, "I won't let them take you, Liara, not while I'm still breathing." Outside, the forest seemed calm, but Daniel knew it was only the eye of the storm. The hunters would come again, stronger and more relentless, and when they did, he and Liara would face them together, not as strangers but as allies bound by trust. The forest at dawn was quiet, but it was not the peace of safety. It was the silence of hunters preparing to strike. Daniel felt it in his bones. His instincts screamed that the night had only been a test. The real danger was coming now. He sat by the rocky crevice, rifle across his lap, while Liara rested against the stone wall, her glowing wounds faintly pulsing like fireflies trapped under her skin. Daniel brushed dirt from his hands, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The hunters would return, and next time they wouldn't be fooled by simple tricks. He leaned closer to Liara, his voice low. "When they come, I need you to stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." Her glowing eyes met his, filled with both fear and determination. "Fight. Together?" she whispered, her English still broken but her intent clear. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't as helpless as she looked. He remembered the way her hand had gripped him with surprising strength. and the way her eyes sharpened. At the mention of the hunters, she had spirit, and that spirit was going to matter. The sun barely touched the tops of the trees when the silence broke. A low hum vibrated through the forest, louder than before. Daniel's stomach clenched. "They're here," he muttered. Liara stiffened, her glowing eyes narrowing. She whispered in her tongue, then in broken English, "Too many. Dangerous." Daniel chambered around in his rifle, the metallic click echoing in the crevice. "Doesn't matter," he said firmly. "We fight." Moments later, the blue light appeared again, sweeping across the forest floor like the blade of a knife. Voices followed, metallic and sharp. The hunters were calling to each other, closing in on the ridge. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. He had hunted deer and wolves in these woods before, and tonight he would hunt the hunters. He slipped from the crevice, crawling low across the damp earth. Liara reached for him, but he gave her a steady look. "Stay," he whispered. She reluctantly nodded, pressing herself into the shadows. Daniel moved like the forest was part of him. Quiet, careful, his boots making no sound. He spotted the first hunter scanning the ground with its strange device, its back turned. Daniel raised his rifle, squeezed the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the silence. The hunter staggered back, sparks erupting from its chest before it collapsed, but the shot gave away his position. The other hunters snapped toward him, their weapons glowing with blue energy. Bolts of searing light shot through the trees, exploding against trunks, burning bark. Daniel rolled behind a fallen log, his lungs tight. The smell of scorched wood filling the air. Liara's voice rang out softly from the crevice, strange words in her language, and suddenly, the air around. Daniel shimmered faintly. He glanced down and saw his outline blurred, as if she had cloaked him in some small way. "Go. Safe." Her voice whispered in his head. Daniel gritted his teeth, amazed but focused. He used the cover to move quickly, circling around the hunters. One of them stalked past his hiding place, weapon glowing. Daniel lunged from the shadows. Slamming the rifle's butt into its helmet, the figure fell. Daniel fired point blank, the alien weapon clattering to the ground. A sharp cry made him whip his head around. Liara had stepped out of the crevice, her glowing hands raised, silver blue light sparking between her fingers. One of the hunters turned its weapon toward her, but before it could fire, she unleashed a burst of energy. The ground lit up as the force struck the hunter's chest, throwing it backward into the trees. Daniel's jaw dropped for a second. He hadn't realized she could fight back, but there was no time for wonder. Another hunter's weapon beam hissed past his head, scorching the bark inches from him. He dove behind cover and fired. Again, the bullet struck true. The figure stumbled, fell, and lay still. The forest was chaos now. Gunfire, alien energy beams, sparks of silver blue light, and shouts of metallic voices. Daniel and Liara moved together, covering each other, her strange powers flaring whenever. His rifle couldn't reach. His traps, sharp branches, tripwires he had set long ago for animals, now serving against enemies far deadlier. One hunter caught his leg, dragging him out from cover. Daniel struggled, the alien weapon raised to his chest, but before it could fire, Liara screamed. A pulse of energy ripped through the air, slamming into the figure and knocking it away. Daniel gasped for breath, scrambling to his feet. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he muttered. Liara managed a weak smile despite her exhaustion. Finally, silence returned. Smoke curled from the scorched trees. Broken bodies of hunters lay scattered across the ground, their strange suits sparking faintly. Daniel leaned against a tree, his chest heaving, his rifle almost empty. Liara stumbled toward him, her body shaking. He caught her before she fell, lowering her gently to the ground. She looked up at him, her glowing eyes dim with fatigue. "Daniel, safe?" she asked, her voice trembling. He brushed a strand of her pale hair back, nodding firmly. "For now," he whispered, "we're safe. For now." But inside, Daniel knew the truth. This was only the beginning. If these hunters had found them, more would come. Stronger, faster, and less likely to make mistakes. The battle in the woods had been won, but the war for Liara's life was far from over. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw set. He looked at Liara, who was still clutching his arm as though it was the only thing holding her to this world. And he made a silent vow. He would not let anyone take her. Not the hunters. Not anyone. The forest around them stood still, scarred by the fight. But in the center of that chaos stood two figures, an ordinary man and a hunted alien woman, bound, together by survival, trust, and now by battle. The forest smelled of smoke and damp earth. Broken branches lay scattered across the ground, and faint sparks still hissed from the hunters' fallen suits. Daniel stood in the silence, his rifle heavy in his hands, sweat and rain dripping down his face. His chest rose and fell with every breath. It felt like the entire world had held its breath during the battle, and now it was slowly exhaling. Beside him, Liara leaned against a tree, her glowing wounds faint, but no longer spilling their strange silver-blue liquid. She looked weak, but her eyes, those glowing, otherworldly eyes, were fixed on Daniel, filled with something he hadn't seen before. Trust and hope. "Daniel," she whispered softly, her voice fragile. "You save me." Daniel set his rifle down carefully and crouched beside her. "We saved each other," he said, wiping dirt from her cheek with the back of his hand. She gave him a faint smile, but it quickly faded as her gaze drifted to the bodies of the hunters scattered across the forest floor. "More will come," she murmured, her accent breaking the words, but the meaning was clear. Daniel looked out into the trees, his jaw tightening. She was right. This fight wasn't finished. Killing these hunters had only bought them time. "Then we'll be ready," he said firmly, though deep down, he knew they couldn't fight an endless wave forever. The morning light began to break through the trees, painting the forest in soft gold. Daniel helped Liara stand, supporting her with one arm. She was unsteady but determined to walk. Every step she took seemed to weigh heavily on her, yet she pressed forward. "Where go?" she asked, her voice low. Daniel thought for a moment. His cabin was no longer safe. The hunters knew where it was, and staying in the forest meant they'd always be running. He sighed. "We'll find somewhere else, somewhere far from here, somewhere they won't expect." He looked at her. "But we'll do it together." She stopped for a moment, looking up at him with wide, glowing eyes. The word "together" seemed to linger in the air, warming her more than the sunlight itself. She reached for his hand and squeezed it weakly. "Together," she repeated, her voice trembling but filled with certainty. They made their way to a quiet stream deep in the woods. Daniel let her rest on the bank while he cleaned his rifle and checked the supplies he had carried. There wasn't much. Some food, water, and a few bullets left. Liara watched him work, curiosity in her gaze. "Why, risk all for me?" she asked again, her voice slow but steady. Daniel looked up at her, pausing. "Because no one deserves to be left behind," he said simply. "I don't care if you're human, alien, or anything else. I couldn't just walk away." She studied him carefully, her eyes glistening with tears. Then she whispered in her own tongue, a word that carried weight, a word he couldn't understand but could feel. It was gratitude, deeper than anything words could hold. The hours passed, the forest quieted, but Daniel's mind didn't rest. He kept scanning the trees, always expecting more hunters to appear, yet Liara seemed calmer now. She hummed softly in her own language, her voice like a gentle song. Daniel listened, surprised by the peace it brought him. For a moment, he almost forgot the danger that hung over them. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden trail leading out of the forest. Daniel knew it would take them toward the hills, a place where caves and valleys could offer cover. He stopped and looked at Liara. "If you stay with me, life won't be easy," he warned. "We'll have to keep moving, keep hiding, but I'll do everything I can to protect you." Liara stepped closer, placing her glowing hand on his chest, over his heartbeat. "Safe. With you," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. They weren't just survivor and protector anymore. They were something stronger. That night, under the stars, they rested by a small fire. Daniel leaned back against a rock, rifle close by, while Liara sat beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, the silver glow of her skin mixing with the warm firelight. For the first time since the accident, she looked at peace. Daniel gazed up at the sky, the stars endless and bright. He wondered what world Liara had come from, what life she had lost, and whether she would ever return. Part of him knew she didn't belong here, but another part, the stronger one, hoped she might stay. Liara whispered softly, "Daniel, my world, gone." Her voice cracked. My world now." Daniel froze, her words sinking deep into him. He turned to her, seeing the sincerity in her glowing eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was filled with more meaning than words could hold. The fire crackled, the night wrapped around them, and Daniel realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a bond that had formed in the darkest of nights, a bond strong enough to change both of their lives. Tomorrow the hunters might return, tomorrow danger might come again. But tonight under the stars, a human and an alien sat together, bound by trust, courage, and something new. Something that felt like the start of a new beginning. Daniel whispered into the quiet night, his voice steady. "You're not alone anymore. Liara, whatever comes next, we face it together." She closed her eyes, leaning closer, her faint smile glowing brighter than the stars above. And so, the man who had stopped on a rainy night to help a stranger found himself at the start of a story far greater than his own, a story where compassion had defied fear, where kindness had become strength, and where one choice had led to a new beginning.